Hi everyone, welcome back to Feather Stitch House. My name's Rebecca and each week on this channel I upload videos about embroidery and textile art to help you get creative. So this week I hope you're excited to hear that we are going back to our Stitch Alphabet series. Now I started this series about 4 weeks ago looking at stitches that began with the letter A, and so the logical next step is the letter B. I'm going to start with a quick look at my letter B page that I've already stitched, and then I'm going to take you through the process of stitching a whole range of stitches that start with the letter B. There are some tricky ones in there, but there are some really good beginner stitches too, so I hope that there's something here for everybody, no matter what level of stitcher you are. If you want to post your stitch sampler pages, I would really love to see them. Do tag me so that I'm more likely to see your creation. So if you use the tag @FeatherStitchHouse, I will get a little notification to say that I've been mentioned in your post and I can go and have a look. You could also use hashtag FeatherStitchHouseA to Z, or A to Z if you're watching on the other side of the Atlantic. And that way all our panels will be gathered into one place and we'll be able to see everybody's version all together. So grab some thread, I'm using blue, and let's get stitching. Okay, so here's my alphabet book, and we looked at A stitches last month, and this month we're going to look at the stitches beginning with B, and I thought I would just show you the page that I created. So we've got a whole range of stitches here, and I also added lots of buttons. I mean, I've added buttons to a lot of the pages, but they worked particularly well here because buttons begins with B as well, so that might be a little detail that you want to add. You could also add beads or buckles, anything that begins with B would work. And I cut out my felt letter B. This was the fabric that inspired this page. So what I tend to do is choose a feature fabric and use that fabric to guide the colour scheme. So I've got some variegated thread, where is it, here, in shades of blue and green and beige, and then I've got these earthy olive greens, this sort of denimy blue and a pale blue. That's my three main colours, and this beige here, and I've just done variations of it. I've tried to experiment a little bit with the stitches, so we've got some overlaid stitches here, some overlapping stitches, and I did make this in 2021, so this is quite a long time ago, and I've added to my stitch repertoire since, and so I would have added some different things again if I was stitching this now, but I'm not going to redo it. I'm quite happy with this page as it is. So this is where we're heading, and off we go with our stitches. Okay, so we are back with our natural linen set in a hoop, and this week we are looking at stitches beginning with B. So again, I'm going to start off with a set of parallel lines. So I'm just sketching these onto my fabric there, and we're going to start off with a nice straightforward one, and that is blanket stitch. So I'm working it in blue thread. Again, it's pearl cotton, and I'm working in blue because I did my page in shades of blues and greens. So blanket stitch is one of a family of stitches made with loops, and we're going to start top left. All right, so blanket stitch is made out of a set of horizontal and vertical lines, and we want to start with our horizontal line. So wherever your horizontal line is going to fall on your fabric, that's your starting point. And for this one, we want to imagine that we have a set of boxes. So if it helps, we can put in our little boxes along our line just to keep our stitches even. And again, if you're on counted fabric, these are naturally formed by the weave of the fabric, and at each corner you will have a little hole. So fabric like Binker or Ada, you'll have a little hole. So we're going to imagine that there's a little square and we've come up top left. Now horizontal line will run along here and our vertical lines will follow these lines here. So we've come up top left, we're going to go down bottom right. So if you haven't got boxes, you need to go across 1 stitch length, down 1 stitch length, and that is where your needle goes back through. And we're going to pull through until we've created a bit of a loop like this. I'm going to bring our needle back up inside that loop on the top right corner of our little box, like that. So the needle has got a loop around it. And when we pull through, we're going to pull in the direction that corner is pointing. So we're going to pull out this way, and that loop gets caught around our working thread and pulls into a right angle like that. So now we start our new stitch. So we're on our top left, we're going to go down bottom right, pull through to make a loop, bring our needle up inside that loop on the top right corner and pull through. So down diagonally, up top right inside that loop and pull through. And we just work our way along our line in that way. Now this will work around curves and it'll work around corners. I'll show you how to turn a corner in a second. It's a great edging stitch because you end up with that line along the edge of your shape. It's a good outline stitch, and I'm going to show you some ways that you can vary it in a minute. So let's imagine that we want to turn a corner and come down here. Alright, so we've got our last stitch. We want to stop 1 stitch away from the corner. So however wide you've made your stitches, we're going to stop 1 stitch away from the corner. But this time, instead of coming down bottom right, we're going to go back in the same hole that our last stitch was formed in. Pull through our loop and we're going to come out right on the corner that we want to turn around and pull through. So what we're doing is pivoting around this point here. So now we're going to go through that hole again, and this time we're going to come up on our next side. So we're going to come out 1 stitch length down from the corner on our new side, and we're going to pull that through. We've made a little diamond in the corner, and now we can carry on stitching. Normally I would turn my work, but we can carry on stitching down our new side like nothing happened. Like that. Now you might want to turn an external corner. So here we've made an internal corner. What if I now want to come along this line here? So what if I want to come out in this direction now? So we do the same thing again, but this time instead of pivoting around the vertical part of the stitch, we're going to pivot around this point here. So we are going to make a stitch diagonally down from the corner, like that, and we're going to bring our needle up at the corner where we made our previous stitch. So I'm going to pull that through in the direction of the corner, and we've made a little V, and now we're going to come directly down, and we're going to come up in that corner again and pull through. So this time we've pivoted around the right angle. So we've got a little trio of stitches there, and now we can carry on. So we're coming diagonally down, up inside the loop, and we can carry on our new edge as though nothing happened. When we want to finish our thread, so if we're running out of thread and we need to start a new one, or we have finished the end of our line, what we're going to do is hop over that corner, so the thread that made the loop, hop over it into the corner, pull through, and that puts in a little anchor stitch, and we can knot that thread off on the back. Now if you want to start a new thread, we just thread our needle up, and we need to start where we would come up if we were carrying on with the same thread. So we're going to come up just inside that corner, and we carry on as though nothing happened. So we place our thread exactly where it would be if we hadn't run out, and that gives us a pretty seamless join. So that is blanket stitch. I've drawn a couple of circles on here because we can also work blanket stitch in a circle, and there are a number of ways of doing it. So we're going to start off with a blanket stitch eyelet or blanket stitch wheel, and we're going to start on the edge of our circle, and this one we're going to work around a pivot point in the center. So we want to find the center of our circle, and you can mark it if you want to with a pen, so it's roughly the center there. And so all our verticals are going to be worked at this point, so it's a little bit like how we turn the corner here, starting all our stitches through that pivot point. So we're going to do exactly the same again. So we're going to come down at the center, pull through to make our loop, and we're going to come up a little way along the outside edge of our circle, making sure our needle passes through that hoop. Now if you want a smooth circle, you need to make your stitches much closer together. If you don't mind it being a little bit angular, you can do your stitches a little bit further apart. So let's find the midst in the sea, as they say, and I've got about a ½ centimetre stitch there. So back down at the centre, up again at the edge, about a ½ centimetre further around the circle, back down at the centre, up at the edge, a little way around the circle, and we basically work around the circle in that way until we get back to the beginning. So this is a blanket stitch eyelet or a blanket stitch wheel. These are lovely stitches. Really decorative. They look nice with a bead at the centre. You can stitch on sequins like this, so if you've got big sequins, they can look really nice. You can do this with a piece of fabric underneath, but they look lovely just on their own. And you can go back in and fill each stitch with a straight stitch or another stitch that's going to fill that gap if you want to. You've got fabric with large polka dots on, you can stitch over the polka dots. And when you get back towards the beginning, you need to make sure that you've got roughly a stitch length left between your previous stitch and your starting point. You're going to come up on the edge of the circle like that, and just like before, we're going to hop over that point and go back down through the fabric, and we can finish off on the back. So that is a blanket stitch eyelet. Now we can also work our spokes going outwards. So this time we're going to come up on the edge of the circle, but rather than creating an eyelet, hopefully you can see that little hole at the centre, we're going to work our spokes outwards. So we're going to come out from our circle, bring our needle back up on the edge through that loop and pull through, and then we're going to do the same again and come back up on the edge of the circle inside the loop and pull through. And you can do this in a range of ways, so you can radiate your stitches out from the circle, you can work them slightly angled so that you can see they appear to be kind of spinning off. You can make your spokes totally even, or you can randomise the length of the spokes, have some really big spokes and some much smaller. You can overlay these, so I could put a second colour over the top and work the horizontal part of the stitch a little further in to the circle. So you can really play with this stitch when you work it in a circle. All sorts of effects. Make really nice, very simple suns. You want to create a sunshine on a piece of work. You've got a very simple sun here. Should have made my circles a bit further apart. I think I'll get away with it. And again, when you get back to the beginning, you want to make sure your stitches are evenly spaced so that you can finish your last stitch at the very beginning of your first stitch. So through we go, stuck, there we go, hop over your corner and through to the back. So that's two ways of working your blanket stitch in a circle. We've got the blanket stitch eyelet and we've got the open blanket stitch. Now, the stitch I probably should have started with is one of the simplest stitches of all, and we can make this go in whatever direction we want to. So let's have a nice curve here and work it round in a spiral. So this is great for lettering, it's great for outlining, and it's one of the easiest stitches. We need to think about the length of the stitches we want to create. We want to start one stitch length away from the very end of our line, and we're going to pull through, and then we're going to go back to the beginning of our line like that and pull through. And now we're going to bring our needle up one stitch length further along the line, so we're creating a gap between the end of the first stitch and the beginning of our second stitch, and pull through. And then we take our needle back down at the end of that first stitch, so down through the same hole if you can, like that, and pull through. Then we're going to come further along our line, 1 stitch length, pull through, back to the end of the previous stitch. One stitch length further along the line and back to the end of the previous stitch. And you'll never guess this is called back stitch because we work backwards to come forwards. So it's a really versatile stitch. You can decorate this. We'll do that in future videos. It can follow curves, it can create shapes, it outlines. It's such a versatile stitch, and it's one you should definitely have in your repertoire. Important to keep your tension right with backstitch, because if you pull it too tight, you're going to open up spaces between your stitches. So you don't want to pull too tight, because we're always taking the thread back on itself. That creates a pull on the fabric apart from it, between the warp and the weft and the threads of the fabric. So it pulls those threads apart from each other and can open up spaces. And you don't really want that. You don't want a bunch of holes all the way along your piece. So you want to pull through just enough that your thread sits on the surface without any hassle. You don't want to pull it until you can see daylight. You can see it's following that line really beautifully. It is quite thread hungry because obviously every stitch you do on the front, you do a double length stitch on the back. On the back, the thread is coming from here to here, and I've run out of thread. Don't be tempted to go around bends too quickly, and if you want to create a really smooth curve, you might want to just shorten your stitch length ever so slightly to prevent a sort of angular look. But that is back stitch. Super simple. I want to revisit blanket stitch briefly, and we're going to create something called a blanket stitch bar. I'm just going to do it in this little space here, and we're going to start by doing a couple of straight stitches. So we're going to make a little bar like this. Let's put a third one in just in the middle of those two. So we've got 3 straight stitches here, and then we're going to come up right at the beginning of that first stitch. And what we're going to do is blanket stitch over the top of these 3 straight stitches here. So we're going to slide our needle underneath. I'm not going through the fabric, I'm just underneath those stitches, and I want to bring it out over the top of that loop. So that was our loop. We've come in underneath the stitches and we pull it through and pull it over to the left. So rather than going through the fabric, we're using this as our vertical stitch. So we loop around, we slide our needle underneath the 3 stitches and pull it through like that. So underneath the stitches, through the loop. Trying to keep my arms out of the way, and pull tight. And when we pull tight, those stitches just line up against each other, and create a bar. So under, through the loop and up, under, through the loop and up, under the stitches, through the loop, pull up. Every now and again it's worth just letting your needle hang loose and untwist, otherwise your bar can start to twist. Now this is really great for making buttonhole loops. So if you have a button on the back of a piece of clothing, or you want a closure that uses a button, this is a lovely way of doing it, because you can make your stitches longer than the space they're going to cover, and it makes a little bridge. And we've got our little blanket stitch bar across those horizontal stitches forming that bridge. I think I can get one more stitch in there. When you're done, we take our thread back through the fabric and secure it on the back, and that makes a little loop that, if you make it long enough, will form a little button loop. And you could work that over the top of some ribbon or thread some ribbon underneath it. Really nice, cute little stitch. Okay, so you can see I've put myself a pair of parallel lines here, and I've marked every ½ centimetre along my line, because we're going to do a stitch called Basque stitch. We're going to come up on our line at the end, just above our first marker point, and we're going to work this stitch with a sort of horizontal line going across the top, and it's going to have loops coming down. So we've brought our thread through, we're going to take our thread over the top, and I'm going to take my needle down across my parallel lines, going in on the top line and out on the bottom line at my first marker, like that. And I want my thread to go behind my needle. So my working thread is going behind my needle. I'm going to bring it across the front and underneath the tip of my needle. So let me show you that again. So my thread is coming out here, it's looping round, and it's in my needle at the end there. So I've got a loop going off the top of the screen, outside and back round. I'm going to take my thread behind the eye of my needle, across the front and underneath the point of the needle. So I'm making a Z shape with my thread. And then I'm going to pull it through, and that creates a little loop like that. And then we're going to hop over that loop. You don't want to pull it too tight. Make sure you've still got a sense of the loop there. Hop over the loop with my needle and anchor that loop in place like that. Now we're going to come back up inside the top of that loop. So I've come back in at the point where that loop begins, and I'm going to go down through the fabric on the top line, and I'm going to come back out on the bottom line. I'm going to take my working thread behind the eye of my needle, across the front and underneath the tip of my needle. I'm going to pull that through and you might need to just even it up a little bit. Hop over the loop and put a little anchor stitch in place. So up inside the top of the starting point of that loop, in that little corner there. I want to get my needle right into the corner. There we go. I'm going to take the thread across because that's the easiest way to do it, and I'm going to take my needle over the top of that working thread, down at the top line, out at the bottom line. Then I'm going to get my working thread, bring it over the front and under the back of the needle, and again I'm going to pull through till that sits nicely. Hop over the loop and anchor it in place. So up in the corner, this is a bit of a brain teaser. If you lay your thread along the line, you'll find it a bit easier, because then we put our needle over the top of that thread, come in on the top line, come out on the bottom line, take that working thread across the front and underneath the tip of the needle and pull through. Tighten it up if you need to, and back down. Up in the corner, lay the thread along the line, down on the top line, out on the bottom line, bring the thread over the top and under the point, pull it nice and tight and pull through. Hop over and anchor. So when you want to finish your line, we need to come up in that corner, and we've anchored down here, but we also need to anchor up here, otherwise this stitch is going to droop. So we're just going to come up inside the corner as though we're starting another stitch, hop over that corner and pull through, and that is Basque stitch. If you want to finish in the same way that you started, you would just put a little horizontal stitch across, and there you've got some symmetry. So that is Basque stitch. Okay, so we're going to do this stitch next. It's quite tricky, but hopefully I can show you how to do it. And it's worked between two parallel lines. It's called bonnet stitch, and we start on our bottom line and work right to left. So this is all about the direction of the thread. I wanted you to see a few of the stitches together so you can get a sense of the structure. So we've got this kind of Y at the top, and then we've got a little triangle at the bottom. So we start on the bottom right. You can imagine this is the start of a new set of stitches. In fact, let me start it again. So we are going to come up at the bottom right, and we're going to loop our thread around in a clockwise direction. Right, so we've taken our thread around clockwise like that, and we're going to come up to the top line above where our threads come out. We're going to scoop up a tiny little section of fabric on the top line, and as we pull through, we want to make sure our needle passes over that loop and pull a little bit down. So you want that Y shape to form. So this time we're going to make the second part of the stitch, and we want to curve it round anti-clockwise. So we want to come back on ourselves, and we're going to take our needle down just above and to the right of where we started, and we're going to make an angled stitch down to our bottom line, and we're going to have our needle come out just below the top left of the stitch, and we want our needle to pass over the loop again, like that. It's a little bit like an ampersand. Alright, so then we loop our thread clockwise again. We're going to go a little bit along the line from the previous stitch and scoop up a little bit of fabric along that line, bring it through, passing over the working thread and pull down. Now we're going to loop anti-clockwise, and we're going to take our needle down just behind where these threads cross over, and we're going to make our diagonal stitch down so that the needle comes out underneath the top left part of the stitch. I'm going to go over the top of the loop and pull through like that. So round clockwise, scoop up a little bit of thread, a little bit of fabric horizontally on the top line and over the top of the loop, pull down, loop anti-clockwise, go in behind the crossover, angle your needle down over the top of the loop to the bottom line and pull through. Clockwise, scoop over the top, pull down, form that Y, anti-clockwise, angle the needle down over the top of the loop. Clockwise, scoop a bit of fabric over the top of the loop and pull down, anti-clockwise, angle the needle down over the top of the loop like that. And when we get to the end of our line and we want to finish, just hop over the loop on that bottom edge and pull through, and that's bonnet stitch. So like I say, it's quite tricky to get it looking super neat and super even. You can always do a little bit of readjusting with your needle, but we've got this little Y shape at the top and a little kind of triangle at the bottom, so that's bonnet stitch. Okay, so the next stitch we're going to do, we're going to work down these two parallel lines. We're going to bring our thread up on the left hand line like that. This is called braid stitch. We're going to take our thread round in an anti-clockwise loop, and then we're going to do a bit of a scoop of thread. So we're going to take our thread over the top and underneath that needle, over, under, and then we're going to pull that back to the right hand line, take the tip of the needle in, then I'm going to just pull on that thread so that that loop sits flat, so it's kind of figure eight. Holding my thread out to the left, and I'm going to bring up the tip of my needle on that left hand line and take the thread underneath the tip of the needle and pull through, and we get this lovely little figure eight loop. So again, we're on the left hand line, thread goes round in a loop. I'm going to go over the needle and under the needle, use my finger to hold that in place while I pull back to the right hand line. I'm going to take the tip of my needle down on that line next to where that thread came out, and I'm just going to pull to tighten that up. Then I'm going to bring up my needle on the left hand line just next to where it came out before, take the working thread underneath that needle and pull through. So over and under, over to the right hand line and in, out on the left hand line, pull on the working thread to tighten it up, under the tip of the needle and pull through. And this works better if you work them fairly close together. So round anti-clockwise, thread goes over and then under, back to the right hand line, up on the left hand line, like that. Then we're going to pull on that working thread to tighten up that loop, take it underneath the tip of the needle and pull through. So round anti-clockwise, needle goes under and back over, back to the right hand line and in, pull on that working thread to tighten it up on the left hand line, underneath the tip of the needle and pull through. So loop, over, under, right hand line, left hand line, pull on the working thread, under the tip of the needle, pull through. When you're at the end of your braid, you just hop over that loop and anchor that in place. And if you need to, you can just go back in with your needle and even up those stitches along the braid. So that is braid stitch. Now the last stitch we're going to do, we actually need a different needle, and I've got here some milliners or straw needles, and these are really useful for this last stitch that we're going to do for our bee stitches, because the eye end of the needle is the same thickness as the whole length of the shaft of the needle. And this is really important because we're going to pull the needle through some wrap thread, so you can see it's really even all the way along and the eye doesn't bulge out at the end. They can be tricky to thread because the eye isn't very big, but a needle threader should sort you out. Now this stitch is the nemesis of many an embroiderer, but if you follow some basic tips you should be fine. So what we're going to learn is a bullion knot. Let's work it down here in this little space. So we're going to bring our needle through and pull through our thread, and then we're going to loop our thread around. We're going to take our needle back through the fabric and up where we started. So we've caught some fabric and we've got our working thread coming off right next to where the needle's coming out. Now I find it helps to tip my needle up a bit, so I'm going to pull my needle fairly far through so that I can get a bit of an angle, because we're not going to pull our needle all the way through. We're going to wrap this working thread around the tip of the needle. Now it doesn't matter which direction you go in, it will depend whether you're left or right handed. So I'm actually working in the opposite direction to what I would normally do, wrapping around anti-clockwise. And we want to wrap, and you can see I'm pulling them down, I'm letting them pull down the needle to sit next to each other in a little spiral. And we want our wraps to be about the same length as the fabric space that we've caught. So I reckon that's about right. So I'm now going to get the tip of my needle in my dominant hand, and I'm going to hold those wraps with the fingers of my other hand, and I'm going to pull that needle through. And I'm going to keep pulling, and when I have taken up all of the loose working thread, what will start to happen is the stitch, the wraps will fold back on themselves. So they were going up, they're starting to fold back on themselves, and I'm just going to guide them into place with my thumbnail, and I'm going to pull until I can't pull anymore. And those wraps then sit on the surface of the fabric, and then I take my needle back down at the bottom of the stitch, and there we have a little bullion knot. Now that one is, I had a few too many wraps on there, and so it's made a little bridge like that. So you can have them sitting off the surface like that. Let's do another one. So I'm going to bring my thread through at the top of the stitch. I'm going to go back in at the bottom of the stitch and loop my needle back through to the top of the stitch. We've made a little loop in the fabric. Let's do it the right way around this time. So I'm going to support my needle, and I'm going to wrap my thread around my needle enough times that the wraps take up the same amount of space as the fabric that's still caught on the needle. Pinch that with my left hand and pull through with my right hand until the wraps fold back over on themselves. Keep pulling, and then take my needle back through at the bottom of the stitch, and I think that one should sit nicely on the surface. Yeah, so that one's sitting flat on the surface, so I can't move that one easily to the side, whereas that one's a little bridge. Let me show you that again. So we come through at the top of the stitch, you go down at the bottom of the stitch and hook the fabric, come back out at the top of the stitch like that. I'm going to support my needle with my left hand, and with my right hand, because I'm right-handed, I'm going to wrap my needle with the threads until I've got the same distance of wraps as I've got fabric still caught on the needle. It probably overshot there. There we go. Right, so I'm going to pinch those wraps, pull the needle through, and if the needle won't come through, you just want to roll the wraps a little bit backwards and forwards between your finger and thumb. Don't let them go. Just roll them backwards and forwards until the thread comes out. Keep pulling, and the wraps will fold back over themselves, and I go back down through the fabric. And there you have a bullion knot. So they do take some practice. I'm not going to pretend that they don't, but they are lovely, and you can cluster them up, you can overlap them. So let's overlap one here. We're going to make it deliberately too big so that our new stitch forms a bridge over the old stitch. There we go. So hold our wraps, pull the thread through, and over the top, back down at the bottom of the stitch, And there we've got a little bullion knot bridge over the bullion knot below it. And then once we've done, we can finish off our thread on the back. So that's our bullion knot. So we've done loads of stitches for this one. Back stitch, we've got blanket stitch, and we've got an external corner and an internal corner. Then we've got a blanket stitch wheel and an open blanket stitch worked in a circle with the spokes going outwards. We've got a blanket stitch bar, and that was the one where we can put something underneath it, sitting proud of the surface. Then we did Basque stitch, love this one. We did bonnet stitch, braid stitch, and a bullion knot. And so that is our set of stitches beginning with B. So you can play away, have a great time making your stitch sampler for the letter B. And if you are interested in letter A, if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it down here. And if you want some other slow stitch projects, I'll link a playlist up here for you. Have a great time practicing your stitches, and I will see you soon. Bye!